on average, to achieve excellence in anything takes 10,000 hours of purposeful practice. Whether it's playing the violin or becoming an Olympic rower.
Welcome to the Sonder Podcast. An epic story that continues invisibly around you, like an anthill sprawling deep underground, with elaborate passageways to thousands of other lives. I'm your host, Alexander Robertson, and this is where strangers become stories.
So, you noticed earlier I had a real tennis ball with me, which I've just brought along today because actually this was given to me by a bit of a legend over 10 years ago. And
there we go. What fun.
You signed that for me 10 years ago. So I thought I'd bring it. And I think very serendipitous that
I remember that. Yeah.
You're our first podcast interviewee. And thank you again, Howard. So, there we go. Well, let's get into the interview. So, hello and welcome to Sonder. I'm Alexander Robertson, your host, and I'm delighted to be here today with Howard Angus MBE. So I can't say how delighted I am to have you here today, Howard. Someone who's inspired me, and we've gone through something you gave me 10 years ago. But, you know, businessman, Cambridge blue, full blue, 2 half blues, champion of 2 sports, world champion, family man, and MBE. What a combination. So I'm looking forward to really getting into that today. And you were world champion of 2 sports, rackets and real tennis. So I thought perhaps you better start with a small introduction as to what they are, having been the champion for rackets from 1973 to 1975, and the world champion of real tennis from 1976 to 1981. So over to you.
Fine. Well, both minority sports. Let's start with the rackets. Not as old as the real tennis. Rackets is the game from which modern squash evolved.
Yeah.
It goes back to really the 18th century, but mainly the 19th century, and developed up, interestingly enough, in the prisons in London.
Oh, interesting.
King's Bench and things like that, where they had huge high walls against which to hit a ball. And rackets evolved, and eventually they added on some side walls as the game developed, and eventually a back wall. So you've now got an enclosed court, which is like a squash court, but miles bigger. So instead of playing in a small white court with a squashy black ball, you play in a large black court with a rock-hard white ball, which leaves the racket at tops close to 180 miles an hour, we reckon.
Is it the fastest racket sport in the world?
In a way, yes. A badminton shuttlecock travels faster off the racket, but slows down incredibly quickly.
Yeah, of course.
A racket's ball goes through the air and rattles around the walls.
Yeah.
And therefore, when you're trying to hit the ball is still traveling fast, much faster than, for instance, a squash ball coming off the back wall. Racket's ball can still be coming off the back wall at a high speed.
Wow.
You know, so it's a very, very exciting game. Why is it still a minority sport? Basically, the court's big and therefore very expensive to build.
Yeah.
So we only have, a couple of dozen courts in this country, and then some courts in the States and Canada. So that's the rackets. The real tennis is much older. Real tennis is the game from which modern tennis, lawn tennis, evolved. Goes back 6 centuries or so.
Wow.
has become real tennis very little known compared to its offshoot. And lawn tennis evolved in the 1870s and very quickly became popular. So they took the game of real tennis, which has got 4 walls and a sloping roof on 3 of those walls and openings in the walls, etc. Complicated rules. I mean, nobody would sit down and devise that game. It had to be something that evolved over centuries. And they said in the 1870s, it's a lovely day. Why don't we do away with the walls and go and play outside? And that was the start of the lawn tennis.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you for that. So I want to dive in now, and part of Sonder is really getting to understand someone and where they've come from and how you've got there. So I wanted to ask, what was your childhood like? Where are you from? And how did it go?
Well, I lived, we're doing this interview here today at the Queen's Club in Barons Court. I lived within walking distance of Queen's Club. My parents moved to a flat in the Hammersmith Road in 1948 and went there for intended 6 months until they found somebody somewhere more convenient, and they were still there when they passed away in the 1970s. So we lived on the 7th floor of this block of flats. The flats had 2 rows of garages, and at the end was the brick wall, which actually was the brick wall of a side of a squash club. And it created a 3-sided play area. And in those days, in the 1950s, there weren't signs saying no ball games and so on. So my brother and I would spend unbelievable amount of time in this area, which was perfect for hitting a tennis ball or whatever. And when other kids in the flats came, we'd play cricket or soccer or something. But I used to spend hours and hours just hitting a tennis ball up against the wall. We'd drawn a tennis net. I knew where the baseline would be from that wall. And the other thing I did, which was great for training, looking back, was I'd borrow a pair of old gloves of my mum's and a golf ball. Go down to the garages, and the floor of the garages between them was concrete with pebbles in it. So a lawn tennis ball actually bounced quite evenly. But a golf ball would hit pebbles and deviate. So throw the ball against the brick wall. God knows what it must have sounded like inside with this guy throwing a ball.
Hooligan from a young age.
And it would land and go one way. And I had to stop it somehow or other on after the first bounce. If I missed it, it was 100 yards down to the pumps at the other end to fetch it.
So also good sort of interval running.
Run down there and just hope that I missed Mr. Burden's car, who was an MP who had a Bentley halfway in one of the garages, and he used to get furious if the golf ball bounced past his Bentley.
Which brings me on to the next question, which potentially he wasn't one of, but what were your biggest influences and role models growing up?
In the early days, my dad, who was a good games player, never really took his sport as far as he might have done. And my elder brother, who he and I would play all our sport together, and that's unbelievably beneficial to anybody who wants to be serious at a sport, if they've got an elder brother who's better and stronger and so on than them, that they can practice with. My dad was competitive.
Yeah.
And he always sort of worked on the basis that if you wanted to do something well, there was no reason why you shouldn't, but you needed some help.
Yeah.
So he arranged for my brother and I to be coached at sports that we were interested in. My brother was wonderful all-round games player. And we had coaching at cricket and at golf and at lawn tennis and squash.
Yeah. So very large generational influence there in the sense he was able to support you.
Absolutely. My mum supported me wonderfully.
Yeah.
But it was my dad who really, I think, generated that competitive element in it. Yeah.
Interesting. So from your childhood, what did that give you that shaped your values and the person you are today?
I was a bad-tempered lawn tennis player, if I'm honest. I think my brother had to put up with a great deal to playing with me in doubles.
Yeah.
I got over that, I think, when I started playing rackets at school.
Right.
Big influences there. I started rackets age 13 when I went to Winchester, who had great history of rackets, 2 courts. And I suddenly realized here was a game where it didn't matter that when I started at rackets, I hadn't reached 5 foot. So I was tiny. It didn't matter that you were short. Whereas, obviously, for lawn tennis, particularly nowadays, unless you're, there are very few 5'5" world-class men players. And I started the rackets, and the pro at Winchester was a big influence.
Yeah.
Great school pro. Other influences there who sort of shaped how I wanted to play sport. Yeah. There was a guy called Harry Altham. Very influential person in the world of cricket.
Yeah.
He was president of Hampshire. He was treasurer of the MCC and then president of the MCC. And supported rackets at Winchester. He'd been a housemaster. He used to come to all our matches.
Yeah.
Let me quote you, if I can, something that he wrote a book with E.W. Swanton on the history of cricket. And when he died, another great cricketer at Winchester, Hubert Doggett, wrote a book editing things which had been written about Harry Altham and by Harry Altham. And the preface was by Sir Alec Douglas Hume, former Prime Minister. And he said about Harry Altham, what was his philosophy? That matches were there to be won with skill and style and chivalry, but to be won.
Yeah.
His was the competitive element tempered by good manners.
Yeah, the Corinthian spirit.
And I think that, that is a phenomenal way to look at playing sport.
Yeah.
You can be competitive, but you can also play it within the spirit of the game, whilst playing as toughly as you possibly can.
Yeah.
You're still going to play it. A rather old-fashioned view, but I do think that, particularly at the rackets, it's a good way of playing because you're on. It's not like at lawn tennis or real tennis, where you're on opposite sides of the net.
Yeah.
You're sharing
small
the same
space.
space, and you've got to treat your opponents with respect.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that Guy Padwick and Harry Altham taught me a great deal about playing in an acceptable way, which I hope I did.
And which you, I think, have passed on to many generations. Which brings me on to, what age did you start real tennis? And with both the sports, what was the moment where you're like, God, I love these games?
Yeah. I never played while I was at school. So I left school at 18 and never having been on a real tennis court at all. And in that summer before I went up to Cambridge, I came in to Queen's here and played a couple of times, that's all.
Yeah.
So I really started when I went to Cambridge. And I went and saw Brian Church, who was the pro at the Cambridge courts, and said, you know, I play rackets and I play some squash. I'd like to learn some real tennis. And he took me under his wing, and we worked incredibly hard over the 3 years that I was at Cambridge. I didn't play the game the way it was expected people would play the game, rather dignified and elegant, etc. No, I ran around the court like a complete maniac. And it didn't matter which court I was on. I was always treated as a refugee from somewhere else. So, you know, when I was playing rackets, they complained because I ran like a squash player. And when I was on the squash court, they complained because I hit it like a rackets player. And when I was on the real tennis court, they complained because I hit it like a rackets player and ran like a squash player. So I was never regarded as being the conventional style, you know. And interestingly enough, Brian didn't mind that, even though he had he'd been trained at the MCC in the real tennis court there, and was very much in the classical mould. He could see I wanted to play it a different way and helped me to develop that.
Which, you know, to use the age-old adage, start as you mean to go on, but then in your career, also as an administrator and umpire, and heavily involved in the regulation now of these games, have carved your own path and changed all of that. But I mean, that said, all the things you've achieved, all the things you've done, family man, world champion, businessman, how did you balance all of that? Because you've been successful at all of it from what I've seen.
Well, I was incredibly lucky in that I was coming here to Queen's, and the games manager here at Queen's was Judy, now my wife, and she was the first woman to be appointed as a lawn tennis coach here
at Queen's,
and she'd been a top junior lawn tennis player, and she was coaching here and games manager. So when we got married, she was unquestionably my best coach, both technically and tactically. Not easy. I mean, she didn't pull her punches. You know, I'd come off after having played really stupidly in a match, and she would give me a hard time about it. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Etc. But helped me think. So she understood what was needed if you were going to try and play a sport
Yeah.
seriously.
I found a piece of print when I was researching for this, which I thought was quite nice, and I think you were quoted as saying, Judy was the sternest and most helpful of coaches.
Yes. I mean, within families, it's not always easy receiving coaching from family members. It very often doesn't work.
Yeah.
For instance, both with our son and our daughter, we didn't try to coach them at lawn tennis because they didn't want it. They found it hard for either Judy or myself to help them. And I understood that because I couldn't take coaching from my dad at lawn tennis, even though he was more than capable of doing it. You know? So you've got to accept that within a family, coaching is not always. Sometimes it works. I mean, Nadal and Uncle Tony seem to work for donkey's years. You know.
So I wanted to go and then ask you, Howard, what values and principles guide your work, both professionally and personally?
You're looking for win-win situations. I don't like conflict.
Yeah.
So from a business point of view, for instance, as I was responsible for looking after the Ford account for an engineering company, I'm trying to find out, what do the people I'm dealing with, what do they want from me? And can I organize that so they can have that, but it still be beneficial and profitable from our point of view? So looking for win-win is very important. Secondly, I think that in business and in life generally, it's much easier if you get on with the people that you're dealing with, you know. In my 50s, crossed the Rubicon. I came out of the motor industry, go back to something that I'd been involved with for many years, these minority sports of rackets and real tennis, and I switched to the pro ranks. I want people to enjoy coming and if I'm coaching them, to feel as though they're enjoying it and they're making progress. I mean, I have had people who do not want to be coached. You know, you may be on court with them, but they do not want any ideas for improving their game. In other words, they're looking for a sparring partner, but they do not want
to admit it.
That I find much less satisfactory than somebody who will actually say, what ideas have you got? And I still enjoy this. That I mean, I was marking a match last night, and afterwards somebody said, any ideas, Howard? And I said, yes, I've got some ideas, and I'll work on it over and I'll see you in 10 days' time at the Queen's weekend, and we can chat about it. And the fact that somebody has asked that, I find it incredibly enjoyable, because I may have some ideas which can help him.
You know? So this is an interesting one, because I've never asked you this, but you obviously were given your MBE, and I wanted to know what it was for and what that meant to you, and if it influenced your life in any way.
It was an incredible honour. It was given for, I think it was contribution to the world of real tennis. in 1981, I think, after I'd lost the World Championship to
Not a bad
Chris
commiseration.
Ranelson. Yes, yeah. My wife and I were at a pre-Wimbledon ball, and on the dance floor we bumped into a guy called Bob Dolman, who was a wonderful squash player, number one for Wales. And he said to me as we passed, he said, "Congratulations on your MBE. That should put the kiss of death on your real tennis career." It was just about true, I think.
And why would that be?
It came at the culmination of me being a serious player, and I was in the process of moving out of London.
Yeah.
And I'd been playing seriously for 17, 18 years.
Yeah.
And people said, "How long are you going to want to go on competing seriously?" And I said, "While I'm still enjoying it."
Yeah. Yeah.
And my last world defence wasn't a great success, and I was practicing more because I felt I ought to than the motor industry in the early 80s was quite a tough environment.
Yeah.
And I was getting up at 6 a.m. and driving to Northamptonshire and leaving there and getting back to Queen's at 9:30 to practice and train and go home and have a sandwich and go to bed and get up again and do it again. And so it was ceasing to be, gosh, I just can't wait to do it. I better go and train. And so when I lost the World Championship to Chris Ranelson, and we were moving from London to go nearer to my work, it seemed like a good time to step back. And I did a huge amount of committee work, etc., associated with the games, and I pulled out of doing that at that time. And the MBE came as a very lovely thing to happen. But it was good. I always wish it had been for a contribution to both games, but I think it was actually given on the real tennis side.
Yeah, interesting. Which actually brings me on to legacy, because you're being very humble, but you've defined a huge amount of what the modern game of real tennis is. For example, having in the 1970s, I believe, redesigned the rackets that are still wooden, but are what we use today. And that leads me to ask, we'll leave real tennis in a second, but what was the highlight of your sporting career or your legacy that you left for it and people like myself that just makes you smile and you think, well, when I'm gone, people will enjoy that?
Yeah, I mean, I was, I suppose, part of the change in the game of real tennis from the old style of play to a much more physical style of play. There were two of us who, on either side of the Atlantic, were playing it in a different way. Myself here, running around really hard around the court and hitting the ball a lot harder than previously. On the other side of the Atlantic, the opposite end of the physical spectrum was a guy called Gene Scott, who had been a United States Davis Cup lawn tennis player, a number of times a semi-finalist at Forest Hill, so a great lawn tennis player, who was a fantastic volleyer, not one of my strengths. And he would hit the ball really hard. And interestingly, many years later, he and I competed a great deal during the 70s. I heard from the pro at the New York club that Gene Scott had said, I'm going to see how good I can be at this game without learning the classical stroke.
Yeah. Interesting.
Had he learnt the classical stroke, had he put the time in, I think he would have been number one.
Yeah.
But he didn't. And although I had some dodgy series of matches with him where I was struggling, in the end, I realized that actually I was a better classical real tennis player. I wasn't great relative to the real tops, but I was actually better at the classical game than he was.
Yeah, which is ironic in your start.
Absolutely. I mean, the other people that I was competing with at real tennis in this country were three professionals. Norwood Cripps here at Queen's, Frank Willis in Manchester, Chris Ronaldson, who later in my career, he'd been in Australia and he came back and he and I competed a lot in the late 70s, early 80s. He took over as world champion from me, beating me here at Queen's. And they were all better stroke players than I was. So I had to be a bit fitter, more competitive maybe, and hitting a different type of ball.
And playing a different game.
A different game. And so Gene and I were part of a change. Now when you look at how, I mean, when I come and watch the British Open doubles, I find it intimidating. Just how hard
people hit.
They hit it. Yeah. I mean, a full-blooded drive from one end of the court. Make a comparison with lawn tennis. At lawn tennis, you've got to make that ball land in the court. At real tennis, the equivalent would be you can hit that ball as hard as you like straight into the stop netting at the other end of the court.
Completely different mentality.
And you're playing not with a relatively
soft ball.
You're playing with a heavier,
fast-moving,
solid ball. And they hit it. So that you've got to defend that when it's still traveling at 100 miles an hour.
Which is so interesting. So I'm going to move away from real tennis for now because I want to, and I know people will want to know the answer to some of these questions, but, you know, were there daily habits or routines that you had or still have that help you maintain your performance, your well-being and your, you know, overall happiness?
Going back to when I was playing, I was not a gym person. What I needed to be able to do was to run incredibly hard in a long, demanding rally. And at the end of that rally, take a few deep breaths and do it again. And go on doing it until the match was over. And be able to come back the next day and do it again. And go on doing that until the tournament was won or lost. So my training was running. I used to go in a squash court and run backwards and forwards, shuttle runs, doing 25s or 50s or 100s. 25 for maximum speed, 100 for endurance, 50 is good compromise. And that's how I built up the strength in the heart and the lungs and the legs.
Yeah.
And I must admit, I probably should have done more in terms of gym work for the upper body. But on the other hand, I was serving a particular serve at real tennis, which is called the railroad, and it's the most physical of all the serves, many serves at real tennis, and is very similar to a lawn tennis serve. And if you're doing that with a heavy ball and a heavy racket for 3 hours plus, trying to spend a lot of the time at the service end, you're going to build up some strength doing that. You know? So certainly that was something that I did, which I don't think my competitors did as well. Nowadays, I have a set of exercises I've evolved over years that I do after my shower in the morning, and I have a deal with myself that if I miss a day,
you can't have that croissant.
Now, if I miss a day because I'm doing something I've got to make it up.
Yeah, definitely. So that central element being that movement, exercise has always been a great mechanism for you to cope when business was tough, keep going when you were training. And obviously you say it was unusual, but it worked because you were champion of both games.
Yeah, interestingly enough, there are an awful lot of people in life who, unless they get regular exercise, don't feel right.
Yeah.
You know? I don't think I'm that way. I've had periods when I've done very little on a daily basis, and it doesn't mean I feel out of sorts, etc.
No.
But I do feel as though trying to do these exercises each morning hopefully is putting off whatever it is that is going to fail. I mean, it could be a back, it could be a knee, it could be whatever it is that gets you to the stage where you can't any longer do what you'd like to do.
So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Howard, is what everyone has their tough moments, all of that sort of stuff. And, in a lot of podcasts, they speak about, well, that's what it was. Obviously, everyone still has their struggles. When you do have those struggles, is there something you like to do? Is there a place you go? Is it a mug of tea in the garden? Is there something that, or is there a person that is your...
I do very much enjoy just being able to sit in the garden. I'm not a gardener. Judy is the gardener in our family. And I'm told to keep well away from that. But to sit with a cup of coffee in the garden, a great joy.
Yeah.
The
fresh air.
Yeah.
So this is something that would be interesting to know as someone that I also look up to, but is there a piece of advice that has resonated with you over the years and influenced your decisions and maybe you'd want to share with our listeners?
If you want to do something enough and you've got the innate talent that you've got to work hard at using that talent. Are you familiar with the 10,000 hour?
No, I'm not.
Well, I first read about this in a book by Matthew Syed called Bounce. Now, I have not come across it, but it is basically that on average, to achieve excellence in anything takes 10,000 hours of purposeful practice. Whether it's playing the violin or becoming an Olympic rower
or in your case, the railroad.
Yeah, I used to come on the court many hours in preparation for a big event, a world championship or something like that. And I used to spend the last 15 to 20 minutes of any hour I was on court on my own, practicing, just serving this particular serve, a railroad serve. Net result was that became a very accurate service for me to use. I didn't have other serves.
No.
Most people have at real tennis a range of different serves, serves from different parts of the court, aiming to do different things. I just served the railroad from the start of one tournament to the end of the next. But you've got to practice it. You've got to work at it. You've got to have the talent. And the idea that talent doesn't matter, in my view, is rubbish. You've got to have the talent. But talent is not enough on its own. You've got to be prepared to put in the hours, and that's what the 10,000 hour rule. It's an idea, and it's on average there are marvelous examples of people who, at running, shall we say, they don't need 10,000 hours.
No.
They can do it in much less. You know. But on average, it seems as though that is something. And now, 10,000 hours is 3 hours a day for 10 years. That's an awful lot of work.
That is a lot of work.
You know? So, yes, if there was something that I would say to people is, you've got to be prepared to work at it. You know? Find something that you are good at.
And you love. Otherwise, you can't keep going.
Of course. I mean, I was on court here at Queen's with my godson, Charlie Danby, son of a great old friend of ours. And we were just hitting up at rackets. And I stopped at one point and I said, you know, Charlie, it is ridiculous. They're now paying me as a pro to do exactly what I would want to be doing
every day
if I was a wealthy person who didn't have to work, etc. I can't think of anything that I would rather be doing at this moment than hitting a rackets ball around the board. You know,
that brings me nicely onto the question of how does one define success and happiness, and you know that seems to be a very poignant example of a lifelong amount of hard application and work. And
I funnily enough, I was saying to somebody in the gallery 24, 36 hours ago, try to find something that you love doing to do as a job. I mean, I'm very conscious of the fact that a huge number of people, they go to work because they have to earn a living. If you can find something that when you get up in the morning, you say, oh, good-o, I'm going to be doing that today. You know? And this person was a ballet dancer. And hoping to maybe teach. And I said, well, if you find that you can combine something like ballet, which you love, and find that you love teaching, and put it together. Wow.
Yeah.
You know?
So exciting. And obviously, you know, we've known each other for quite a long time, Howard, but what's always been incredible for me is no matter at what point I've known you, whenever we've talked about real tennis or rackets, there's been a gleam in the eye, full of energy, full of excitement, which is lovely. Now, I had two more questions, one that I wanted to ask you personally and another that is part of the Sonder experience. And that is, the theory of Sonder is that everyone's living their own vivid life, like a story, and you may be the main character, a villain, a hero, an anti-hero, whatever. What do you see yourself as in your life? You're a supporting character, you're a leader, you know, what would you say you are?
No, not a leader.
Yeah. Which is ironic, because the reason you're here is because you're such an inspiration.
Some people are really good at the big picture.
Yeah.
And they have vision. And they are innovators on a big scale.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite end of the spectrum, I think.
Yeah.
I'm very happy taking the detail of something
In the granularity.
and trying to develop that. How can I make presses for the rackets players. They're using a wooden racket.
Yeah.
They warp if you don't look after them.
Yeah.
So I make presses
Which keep them straight.
to keep them straight. And it's detail work. I've tried to evolve the presses so they really are efficient.
Yeah.
And I don't mind the detail of that. In fact, I enjoy the detail of trying to get things right.
Well, a bit like with these rackets as well.
Yes, certainly. Using any knowledge one has. And nowadays, I do quite a lot of work for the Tennis and Racket Association, deemed to be technical advisor, which means basically I say, well, I don't know the answer necessarily, but I hope I know somebody who does.
Yeah.
But I've got very involved with the lighting of courts.
Yeah, I played one of your courts with the new lighting recently up in Jesmond Dean.
Yes, yeah. And it's detailed work. And I very much enjoy trying to get it as good as it possibly can be for the money that's going to be available to be spent. You know, it's not the huge picture. I'm quite happy to hone in on the detail, and I suppose the fact that I'm playing minority sports would fit in with that. You know.
Yeah.
So?
And leads me to the last question that I have, which is, we spoke earlier about, you know, you exiting or taking a step back when you got your MBE, and it was a lovely exit. But obviously being a competitive sportsman yourself, you know, that must have been a big moment. And there's a story that we discussed earlier that I thought you might want to share with everyone.
Well, yeah, both my first World Championship, first of all at Rackets, and a year later at Real Tennis. Both my first attempts were disasters in one way or another. And World Championships that I should have won, I didn't. But I was saying when we were having coffee earlier that it never really occurred to me that I wouldn't get another chance, which, looking back, is slightly arrogant. But I was telling you the story about Doug Sanders, the golfer. And years and years and years after he ceased to compete, he was being interviewed. And the interviewer said now, Doug, you never did win a major, did you? And he said, well, thank you for reminding me of that. And the interviewer said, now that putt you missed on the 18th for the Open title, the Open Championship, which was that long. Does it haunt you? And Doug's considered it for me. He said, sometimes I don't think about it for an hour. That takes a lot of self-humor to be able to say that.
And humility.
And humility.
Which is something you have in spades.
I don't know. But certainly, had I not had another chance to come back, both at rackets and at real tennis, and eventually actually be successful in a world title. Yes, I can imagine that those two losses could haunt you a bit. God, I worked so hard and blew it. And the fact that eventually you had the right result means that I can look back on those two really bad initial matches with a certain amount of humour about it, because they were hard to take at the time.
Well, on that wonderful note, thank you so much, Howard. It's been fantastic for me as an interviewer to get this opportunity, but wonderful to see you.
Oh, really huge fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, listeners. That was our first episode of the Sonder Podcast, so please like and follow for more, and we look forward to seeing you next time.